Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to today's Scrum Pulse. Today, I have John Riley, one of our professional Scrum trainers here at Scrum.org with me, and he's going to give a presentation focused on establishing a common language on a Scrum team. A really important lesson for us today around communication. So I am Lindsay Velasina. I'm from Scrum.org, and I'll be your moderator today. With that, next slide, please. Okay, just some really quick guidelines here before we get started. This session is being recorded and it will be made available within 24 hours along with the slides. So if you miss anything, you'll definitely be able to refer back to those. And then you will be muted throughout this webinar, but there is going to be lots of opportunity for questions. So please, as you have questions, please add them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we will get to as many of those as we can today. And whatever we don't get, we will share with John afterward, and he'll be able to address them with you directly. So please be sure to ask questions. Next slide, please. Just really quick, some information about Scrum.org in case you aren't totally familiar with us. We are the home of Scrum. We were founded by Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum, in 2009, and our mission is to help people and teams solve complex problems by improving how they work with professional Scrum. We are focused on helping people learn through free online resources and activity-based live training by our more than 340 professional Scrum trainers like John around the world. And we also have our professional Scrum certifications that allow people to validate their knowledge. We support people wherever they are in their learning journey. There are a bunch of free resources on our website as well to help people learn and grow. And I hope that today's session plays a part in that learning for you. So with that, I would like to hand it over to John.
All right, thank you very much, Lindsay. Hello to everybody, and good morning from Columbus, Ohio. I appreciate that introduction, and I'm very grateful to be part of this presentation. My name is John Riley. I am the Principal Agile Coach and Trainer for Ready, Set, Agile, with one purpose in mind, and that is to obtain feedback rapidly and respond to change, and to help everyone in that purpose. My Agile journey started around 2010 when I was on a team that was not really taking on software development very well. And, something was always wrong, right? So I took on the Scrum framework very easily. And, since then, I was on a rockstar team, a rockstar Scrum team, which led to my passion to form Ready, Set, Agile. So just a little bit about some of my efforts outside of what I do for Scrum.org. I've been a Scrum Master on several efforts, including one that's at the top there that is actually a non-IT effort, where their product goal was to come up with a revolutionary building material. Okay, so you can see that goal in itself, is leading to some interesting topics that I've gone through. And also, I was recently a Scrum Master on a media producing company that actually took on the framework very well. Also, some of my other efforts, I consider myself a mentor in many ways. I've gained a lot of experience over my 30 plus years in IT, and I want to share that with everybody. So I am in a partnership with Scrum called You're Up, which will allow young adults to take their current career and go into another career within 1 year. So some of the other things I've done is Scrum in schools, and I have a very strong background in software development and manufacturing. So that's a little bit about me. Let me now go into a little bit about the inspiration of why I wanted to come up with this talk and why I wanted to share it with you. So I was on a team, it was actually a couple of years ago, where I was a Scrum Master. It was a very small team, and it was actually for a truck rental fleet management system. And so the company was a truck rental company. And in one of our sprints, I observed a conversation between our product owner and the lead developer, who's calling himself the lead developer on the project. Okay. And he says, "Hey, Klaus, can we include the admin functions for the new rental features in this sprint?" And Klaus says, "Sure, that should not be a problem." So here I am observing this, thinking, what's going on? Okay. Later that day, the lead developer goes up to Rebecca, another developer on the team, and says, "Hey, Rebecca, Wilhelm wants to do a merge commit on branches admin 21 such and such with admin 21 such and such." Okay, that's doable. So I'm thinking, well, maybe there was something I missed there because I don't remember hearing that conversation that Klaus was talking about. So going to the sprint review, Wilhelm, he comes up as the product owner and says, "Hey, why are these partner admin functions available? The partners should not be able to modify this stuff." And developers kind of say, "Well, you wanted this included in the sprint." And here I am saying, I don't recall that conversation either. What's going on? So at the retrospective, here's me saying, "I noticed that we had a communication breakdown this sprint." And so I introduced this question saying, "Did we use a common language?" And of course, everything was a little bit confusing at that point as well. So what happened? Right? Let's go back a little bit. So I'm going back to the daily Scrum now, and I see that we have these things called admin functions that they want included in a sprint. So I'm kind of looking and seeing, well, you know what? I think I fail as a Scrum Master here because I actually noticed that there was something going on here that was not really communicated very well. I noticed a disconnect. And so as a Scrum Master, I should have said something. The other thing I noticed is that these admin functions were not very specific in the sprint goal. The sprint goal was actually just a list of tasks that we wanted done. So I noticed that in planning. We also have this thing with Klaus. So Klaus heard this one conversation, interpreted it another way, and then he starts talking dev speak to Rebecca about these certain branches in the source code that need to be done. So what's going on with that? Weird stuff going on here, right? And then we have the blow up in the sprint review about, "Hey, wait a minute, this stuff shouldn't be here. What are we talking about here?" Okay. So yeah, several things going on here. Not much of a commonality going on. So we have everything with retrospective. So we can see that we had a communication breakdown, several disconnects. So let's now start going into why a common language is so important on a Scrum team. Okay, so let's consider this scenario. So we have our stakeholder that engages our product owner and says, "Hey, I want to swing." Right? I just want to swing. Okay, so after some conversation with the stakeholder and the product owner says, "Okay, sure, I can get you a swing. And as a little bonus, I'll throw in a pillow in that swing." Right? Okay, fine, great. All right. So now when the product owner comes over and starts communicating that with the developers, right? Developers then say, "Okay, well, we'll build this thing that has 3 seats on it." Right? So here's what we got. We got this overcomplicated thing where the stakeholder is going to have many more bonuses with his swing. Okay. right? What do we got here? We got a lot of disconnects here even, right? Just by saying, I want to swing. And not only that, the stakeholder actually wanted a swing that looks like this. All right. They wanted a tire swing. So still not much of a commonality going on, still some disconnects, right? So the main reason why a common language is so important on a Scrum team is it creates this thing called a shared understanding. Okay. We're going to go a little bit into what a shared understanding actually is because it's referenced in the Scrum Guide in a couple places. Okay. So that what we have is we have an understanding of what is actually needed and what can be produced as part of done. Okay. So that everyone has that understanding. Whenever you in a conversation, you have one understanding for one person, another understanding for another person. Everybody has an understanding of what something should be. Okay, but what's most important is that shared understanding between all parties involved so that you can produce something awesome. Okay, so what a common language produces is a conversation baseline. What I mean by that is you can start your conversations out by saying tire swing, right? We now have this common term called tire swing that is now has something to do with this picture that everybody has. All right. So that we can say when we're talking about the tire swing and we want to create the rope, right? Conversation baseline. Okay. So that's important for establishing a common language. The other thing is that it is important in team learning. Okay. We know we have a small team, but the thing is that everybody has to have what is important for knowing how they are going to learn. Okay, there's this book. It's actually from the 1990s called The Fifth Discipline, which I still refer to commonly. And there's a couple quotes that I wanted to share with you from that book. And what we're talking about here is building a shared vision is vital for a learning organization. So a Scrum team can be considered a learning organization, right? We inspect and adapt. That's what empiricism is based on, making things transparent so that you can inspect what happened and you can adapt the next iteration to what you've learned. Okay. He goes on by saying that team learning must be a part of the common language used to develop the shared vision. Okay. Again, we're referring to this common language, importance in team learning. All right. So when we come together as a team and form that trust with the Scrum values, this common language to develop the shared vision becomes very important. Right. So what is a common language? Okay, we've heard the importance. You've heard my inspiration. What is a common language? Right? How do you describe it? Right? Well, I've gone through some iterations of trying to define it. And this is the best way that I can have to describe a common language. Okay. It's a mixture of taxonomy and terminology. Let me go a little bit into that. So terminology is something that most of us are familiar with, whatever language we speak and write. Okay. Terminology is nothing more than a common word system, right? Fleet management, truck rental, billing, invoice, right? All of those form a common word system. Okay, so that's our terminology for a product, for example, right? So let's now go into taxonomy. So taxonomy takes that one step further. Taxonomy takes our word system and makes it into a hierarchy. Okay, so for example, food can be characterized by vegetables, fruits, meat, dairy, for example. And that is how the words relate to each other. Okay, as opposed to terminology, which is just the group of words itself. Now, The common language is that thing in the middle. Okay. So the common language is which words you use, where you use them, and most importantly, the conditions for where you use them. Okay, so that is the common language, that thing in the middle. So some of you might say, well, isn't that like syntax? Right? So syntax can be a common language. Yes, that's true, because a syntax is sort of like a structure or a sentence structure, if you want to put it that way, of your groups of words. The thing that a syntax doesn't tell you is the conditions for which they use them. Okay, so that's the difference between a syntax and what a common language is. So I hope this makes sense. This is about the best description that someone gave me of what a common language is. Okay, so now let's go a little bit into Scrum itself. Okay, it's a little bit of Scrum theory. There's actually some things that are built into the Scrum guide that we might not know that are part of establishing a common language. As many of you know, the Scrum Guide in 2020 became less prescriptive, meaning it was, kind of getting away from specific industries, from specific wording and specific language within IT itself. Okay, so that said, some of the things might have been missing. So let me see if I can clear up some things about this. One thing in the Scrum Guide that we have now is something called commitments. So there's 3 commitments. One of those is, or 2 of those is the product goal and the sprint goal. Okay, so this that I'm showing you right now is an actual slide from our Applying Professional Scrum class. Okay, and I thought it was very relevant for this talk. So these are some examples of product goals and sprint goals. Okay, they're very specific and they're very carefully chosen. Improve the cleanliness of our waterways, right? These are specific words for a common language for this product, right? Improve the effectiveness of online education. Very carefully chosen words. Okay. Sprint goals. Parents can register and students being able to attend online classes. Very specific words that are part of a terminology and taxonomy. Okay. So these are some examples of how these are actually built into the Scrum Guide. So the other commitment is the definition of done. Okay. What I want to call out specifically about the definition of done in the Scrum Guide is this quote that says the definition of done provides a shared understanding of work, of what work was completed. Okay. So I just wanted to point this out, just saying that we're talking about this shared understanding, right? Very important. What I had the picture of the tire swing with everyone understanding what tire swing actually means. All right. What does that mean when we get to done? Okay. Transparent definition of done so that it can be inspected and we can adapt our increments to this definition of done to create that shared understanding. Very important in establishing a common language. Let's talk about another thing in Scrum, and that's team size. So in the 2020 Scrum Guide, the definition of what is actually in a team size kind of changed a little bit. So the quote that I have on the slide here says that smaller teams communicate better and are more productive. Okay, it got a little less specific than was in previous Scrum Guides. So a lot of people don't understand why that is the way it is. So let me go a little bit into why this is important. So when you have 2 people talking, you have established a communication channel. One channel. I'm talking to someone, someone's talking to me. That's one channel. Okay. When you get 3 people involved, then you have 3 communication channels. Each of the 3 are talking to each other. Okay. So you can see these channels are becoming more important because this is what's creating our shared understanding. So that when these people are talking together and they both say tire swing, each one knows what they're talking about. Okay. So now I see in the chat, yeah, well, what happens if this is a very big team? Yeah, right? This is still a very small Scrum team of 3 developers, a product owner, and a Scrum Master. We have now created 10 communication channels. Okay. You can see that our little team has gotten a little more complex, and each one of these communication channels needs to be maintained to create that shared understanding so that we have a common language. Okay. Very, very important to have small teams. If we were to add one more person to this team, we would have created 5 more communication channels. Okay. Very important to have a small team size when it comes to establishing a common language. All right. This is built into Scrum. This is why we have small teams. Okay. So I'm hoping that becomes apparent. I'm going to take a pause here and kind of look at some of these to see if there's any questions that need to be addressed now. Yes, I'm actually seeing some questions about some metrics. We're going to go a little bit into that. Yes, and we're actually, I see some questions about the definition of done about specific user stories. We're going to go into that a little bit too. Let's see. And let me see if there's anything else here. And yes, I want to make sure that I come back to very hard to get developers to talk less technical. I'm glad someone pointed that out. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. Yes, I totally agree with that, which is why we're doing this. I'm a developer by trade, so this is definitely something. This is definitely a reason why I'm doing this talk. So I appreciate you pointing that out. And so yes, and about the what came across in the chat just now about the development team is too small. Yes, the Scrum Guide actually talks about this. You need to be small enough to be nimble, but large enough to produce a valuable, useful increment. So, so yes, this is definitely something we need to keep in mind. But also knowing that we have a common language that we're trying to develop as well. So okay, so really good questions. I think we just need to move on in the interest of time. Yeah, really good questions. Keep them coming. I don't have much more content that I'm going to present. So product goals, that mean forward planning. Thank you, Rupesh, for that question. It actually does. So a product goal, that can be seen as like a product vision, for example. It's basically that shared understanding that we want to have for some kind of planning. And just to let you know, in Scrum, we're always planning. It's not just, hey, we're just going to do this and see what happens. We're always planning. Okay. So great questions coming through. Keep them coming because Lindsay and I are going to try and see if we can answer some more of these questions. Okay. Excellent. All right. So let's continue. So this is probably why you're here. All right. We talked about some principles, right? And we talked about why a common language is important. We talked about, some reasons why it's valuable to get people on a Scrum team even to use a common language. So let's now get a little bit more into the onion of why or what kind of techniques we can use. Okay. The number one thing I've come up with to have a common language or to try and form a common language is simplify. Keep it simple. This is an agile value. Okay. And actually, there's a principle around simplicity. It's my favorite principle about the art of maximizing what is not done as essential, right? Make it simple. You don't have to spend too much time on establishing a common language. Sometimes simply having the awareness there is important, right? Just letting developers know, hey, I don't understand anything you're talking about right now. All right. So establishing this simple common language, very important. The other thing I found is to make it transparent. As a Scrum Master, this should be your primary job, is to make this stuff transparent. This is where I failed in that scenario that I was talking about with the truck rental company. Okay. I should have said something when I saw something. All right. Help me understand what you're talking about when you want to do a merge commit on all these branches, right? What does this mean? Right. Make that transparent. Make it apparent that it's like you might be talking another language and people might not be understanding, right? We probably wouldn't have had that blow up in the sprint review, right? Transparency is very important. Okay. As a Scrum Master, it's your job to make sure that you know what that transparency means. Okay. Another thing that I have found is a great complementary practice to everything we practice in Scrum is to use something called liberating structures. Okay. So if you're a developer on a team, or if you know of developers on a team that are not really engaging or not really getting your team to talk a common language, what I like to do is I like to use these liberating structures. One of my favorite ones to do in this scenario is called the 1-2-4 all. Okay. Look it up at that web address that I have there, liberatingstructures.com. Of course, as Lindsay's pointed out, you're going to get a copy of all these slides. So all the links that are here, you'll be able to get. Okay. So the goal with the liberating structure is to get people to use their own common language, right? If you're not making tire swings, then you're making something else. Establish that common conversation baseline. Okay. That's the goal of the liberating structure for this purpose. Okay. I can't say this any clearer. Craft a concise sprint goal. Spend time on it. I've found that when I'm a Scrum Master facilitating a sprint planning session, no one thinks of the goal. They're always thinking of the work, right? The work that needs to be done. Okay. A sprint goal is not a list. A sprint goal is there for a reason. It gives the team purpose of what the increment should look like. It creates that shared understanding. A clean user profile screen. That is a concise sprint goal. Okay. Make sure you spend enough time and energy on this so that everyone has a shared understanding of what is supposed to happen by the end of the sprint. Okay. Clear, concise sprint goals. So I saw this mentioned in the chat window about user stories. One thing that I have, once you establish this common language, right, of your terminology and your taxonomy, how words relate to each other, I found that having a templated product backlog item using your terminology is very helpful. Okay, again, this is a complementary practice, so it's not part of Scrum per se. It just complements the principles for Scrum. All right, so this is an actual index card used several years ago on a board. Okay, this was made transparent on the board as to how a product backlog item should look. All right. This team decided that acceptance criteria was going to be how their product backlog items looked. Okay, so you don't have to make a product backlog item look like this, but you'll notice that some of these words in here have things like role, field, user action. Okay, these are actual specific terms that are on this team. This was actually a bank system. Okay, so you can see that it's more like a fill in the blank kind of thing. So they had a list of fields that they used in their application. They had a list of user actions. They had application actions, things like that. Okay. Using these templates, let us form that common language. Okay. So as a banking user, I am a role user, right? It's very effective. Another thing that I have used that is actually takes very little time and is actually pretty pictorial here is using word clouds. I am a very big fan of word clouds, okay, because it's a good starting point. So what I did with this word cloud here is I And if you can guess what this is about, I'd love to see it in the chat. But if you, so what I did was I took me and 5 of my colleagues who were very experienced in this subject here. Close, Elizabeth. Mark got it. Okay, so thank you, Mark. You're right. This is DevOps. Okay, so what I did was I got me and 5 of my colleagues to say, when you think of the word DevOps, what do you think of? And all we did was we just did 1 minute of steam journaling. 1 minute. Steam journaling is where you just write whatever is on your mind. Okay. So we took that and we put it in a tool that did word clouds, that produced word clouds. And this is what we came up with. All right. So the bigger words in a word cloud are the most popular words that the people or whatever you have in your list. Okay. So you can see that DevOps is about continuous testing, right? So you can start to see it's not as structured maybe as a taxonomy, but you can start to see how things are kind of forming and getting related to each other, right? You might even see that this is your terminology right here, right? We did this in less than 10 minutes. Okay. You don't have to spend too much time. It's just nice when you have a transparent view of what DevOps is. All right. Very effective at starting your common language. Oops. Okay. Another thing I found for developers is to codify your terminology. Okay. What does this mean? It means when you see terms that are actually in your terminology, your taxonomy, your common language, use this in your code. Simple as that. Your function headers. Right here is what I have depicted is names of branches in your source control, right? Tire swing admin user. I know what that means. Tire swing admin partner. If you see this, you are kind of forced to say, okay, well, let's use this. And so there you go. You've codified your terminology. Okay. Those are some of the techniques that I have come up with. I do have more. And actually, there's a free workshop you can take from my website. It's a 3-hour workshop. The way I've designed this is that within that 3 hours, that usually doesn't take 3 hours, but what we do is we just kind of have, we can either use your case study or I have a sample case study where we can start to use some of these techniques that you've had that we've seen in the website to form your common language. So check it out. And actually what I'm going to do is I'll just drop the link right now in the chat and to everyone. So there's the workshop right there. Go ahead and check it out. Sign up for it if you'd like. If you can't make it that time, just please email me. Again, you're going to get copies of these slides, which will have all the links. But I'd be happy to set up a workshop for you. While I'm here in the chat, a couple other things I wanted to share with you. I see that there's a lot of chat questions coming through in the chat, which I really appreciate. Some of these are kind of outside the scope of the subject here, but I do have a webcast that is called Raw Agility, where I'm going to take your Scrum and Agile questions and answer them live. So it's me and another Scrum trainer. His name is Ben Thorpe, who will answer your questions live. So go ahead and check that out. That's coming up this coming Monday. And let's see, another thing I wanted to share is my my APS class coming up. So I did refer to an APS slide. If you want, I do have an Applying Professional Scrum class coming up this January 19th and 20th. So very good class if you're just starting out with Agile and Scrum. I just gave one last week, the last week of the year. And I would especially encourage you to look at some of the Trustpilot comments on that, because I asked everyone to be overcritical of the training that they received. So please check out those comments. I'm not sure what link you're talking about there, Roberto. Oh, it works now. Okay, cool. All right, good. It might have been hit a lot. So, all right. So I think that's basically all I have now. Lindsay, are there any questions that you see that are kind of burning in people's minds right now about what we can answer?
There's a lot of burning going on in people's minds. Yes. So I'm going to start going through some of these. We'll get to as many as we can. Luckily, we do have some time left. So this question comes from Rishi. Rishi says that they would love to hear your experiences on how you've helped a Scrum team build a common language when they've been siloed or coming from different organizational silos. For example, developers coming from the back end, front end, the product owner coming from the business.
Right. So if I understand, we've got several people coming from several different parts of the organization. Now they're on a Scrum team and we got some siloing going on. So maybe QA with developers and business analysts and how are you going to deliver a product? I think that's how I understand the question. So thanks, Rishi. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's actually, especially when you're starting out, it's actually very common to have these kind of behaviors. That said, Scrum does have some things built into it for establishing a common language. As I was saying before, having that product goal and sprint goal is very important. What's almost more important is to make that goal transparent. Okay. And like I was saying before, start your conversations with the sprint goal. Okay. This is going to bring you purpose to why you're doing what you're doing this 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month sprint, right? And to know whether the work that you're working on is actually appropriate for it. All right. Those liberating structures become important. They help you start the conversation. The card that's in your whatever your user story or product backlog item management system becomes important, because the purpose of that is to start the conversation, right? Another technique I've used is something called Amiga reviews. All right. It helps you start the conversation. I'd have to say, as a developer, one time I was always that problem solver, right? So company came to me and said, hey, we got this problem. Immediately, my mind just went right into problem solving mode. And I was talking about that rockstar team in the beginning of my session, right? Where I was on the rockstar team, we could just get anything done. And so we had these developers that we could just do anything, right? And then there's this guy who was the tester, the QA guy. And he said, well, that's great, but how are you going to test that? And I'm thinking, whoa, wait a minute. He's right. How are we going to test this thing? Right? So just getting people out of their normal development silos and just having them ask that question as a Scrum Master, have people explain it to you as the Scrum Master. Okay, well, how is this going to get to our definition of done? Is this going to be enough quality where we're going to be able to deliver something at the end of the increment? So, those are some techniques that I've had. I hope that answers your question, Rishi. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Right.
What else we got?
This should be a relatively quick question. Should the definition of done be part of specific user stories to ensure it's clear, or is it only at the sprint level?
That's a good question. So definition of done just for user stories, or what was the other part of it?
Or is it at the sprint level?
As at the sprint level. So, it can be a little bit of both. Okay. So usually the definition of done is part of the sprint itself. Okay. So according to the Scrum Guide, the definition of done is instilled by the developers, but it is the accountability of the Scrum team. Okay. So this is the commitment for the increment. Okay. So when it comes to producing the increment, it should be part of what is going to be delivered. Okay. So that's as concise as I can get. It's part of the
Right.
increment.
Okay, perfect. And this question comes from Sunny. When getting the shared understanding of the tire swing, how do you prevent the stakeholder and product owner from solutioning the developer?
So when you get to the tire swing, how do you prevent solutioning? I'm not sure I understand what that means. How do you prevent the developer from solutioning?
It sounds like they're asking how do you prevent the stakeholder and product owner from solutioning the developer? So from like controlling them.
Oh, okay, I see you. So really, when you talk about a product owner or even a stakeholder, this is something in agility that we try to, prevent by separating the what from the how. Okay, so when we're talking about this common language thing, this is really all about the what. Okay, so what I mean by that is that what is all conceptual. Okay, so we're talking business value. Right. So this is the value I want. I want a swing that's going to be able to, look like this. Right. This is the value that I'm expecting. All right. When you start solutioning, you say, okay, well, I want a swing that is going to be able to be comfortable and is going to be able to be used on a tree. The solution part says, and I want it to look like a tire. Okay. It's up for the developers to then say, okay, well, how about a tire swing? Right. That's where the common language comes in. It's like, yes, tire swing. That's it. And where you're talking about is, oh, I want this to be a tire swing. Right. So as a Scrum Master, what I would do is I would say, okay, sort of describe the business value. Right. Let's go into business value more. Conceptual. Right. So that's kind of how I separate the what from the how. What I showed you there with the acceptance criteria, that's more about a how. So start talking about the what. As a user, I want a swing so that I can enjoy myself. Right. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay.
Yeah, I do see one from Marco here about something about creating a playbook. I do have examples of that. That said, that's getting more into the tools and the actual thing that is completed. So what we're talking about here is more about the principle level. Okay. I go more into specifics about how to create that playbook in the workshop. So probably want to sign up for that.
Great. This next question kind of relates to the previous question a little bit. Can the product owner create and own the common language?
Can a product owner create what kind of common language?
Create and own the common language.
So can the product owner create and own it? Yes, is the short answer to that. That said, I found it to be most effective when this common language or this playbook is owned by the Scrum team. Okay. Because when developers or anyone that's producing the increment starts to speak, they have a common baseline. Okay. It's just like the definition of done. Definition of done is instilled by the developers, but owned and maintained by the Scrum team. And they're accountable for that definition of done. Same thing for this common language. Maybe instilled by the product owner, but owned by the Scrum team so that everyone has that shared understanding. So I hope that helps answer the question. Thanks.
Great. This question, how do you control the communication discipline within a Scrum team?
How do you control the communication discipline within the Scrum team? So I'm just going to say transparently right off the bat, I have a problem with the word control. That said, I understand the need to have discipline within the Scrum team to use a common language. I'm just going to point out where I failed as a Scrum Master before. And what I should have done is I should have said something when I saw something. Okay. As a Scrum Master, you're part of the team, right? It's your accountability to make sure that the team succeeds by making sure that Scrum is instilled. One of those things is transparency. So that's what I'm talking about, is where I failed as a Scrum Master. Point that stuff out. If you hear this within your team, say, okay, I don't understand how branch admin 21 blah, blah, blah relates to the new admin functions that you're talking about. Just set up the conversation that way. Make it transparent. I'm a visual person. Help me understand what this means. Draw it out on the board. Or let's have a session on that. Or, just let's talk about it for 5 minutes. Right. So as a Scrum Master, that's one way you can do it. And I think that's really the most effective way, I think. And just make sure that maybe, have some measurements around your, what you're expecting in your language. Right. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. There's a couple questions here actually around the sprint goal.
Mm-hmm.
This one question here: how do you create a concise sprint goal if your tasks don't all align to one goal? And then there's another one here. Where did it go? When the sprint is full of stories that aren't really all focused on one thing, how do you do a sprint goal?
Yes.
There's a few others in here related to sprint goals.
Okay. Well. Yeah, I totally understand the confusion around, getting onto a Scrum team and having this thing called a sprint goal. And I'm sure that everyone understands, many people understand that, the sprint goal is what's most important. The work is secondary, right? So, think about a product owner where they have to take a bunch of product backlog items and order them appropriately. That is a task in itself. All right. Just know that when you have a list of tasks, there is a single most important task on that list that needs to be created. You can start out by saying, hey, that's my sprint goal. All right, let's rally around that. Some common misconceptions about this. It does not mean that you need to take up all of the time in the sprint just to accomplish that one goal. Okay. The sprint goal brings purpose. It brings meaning to why we're doing what we're doing. Okay. So if you have 2 tasks that are unrelated, this task becomes our sprint goal, right? You decide to bring that second task in according to your definition of done. Remember, very important, according to the definition of done. All right. Are we absolutely positive that we have accomplished this sprint goal so that we can then show our stakeholders the increment when they're inspecting the increment that this is what we wanted to accomplish? Okay. It's important to get done to our definition of done, but what's more important is that stakeholder feedback we get, because that is going to help us inspect the increment so that we can adapt the next increment to that feedback. Okay. It's very tough to do, but just know that you don't have to take up all the time to accomplish that task. That's what I found anyway.
Yeah, and there's a good follow-up question to add on to that here from Liana. How can the Scrum Master help with this?
How can the Scrum Master help with this? So the one way that I've found is I've lined up all the tasks that the developers have chosen to pull into the sprint. And when we say, okay, what's the sprint goal? What I do is since the developers own the sprint and they've owned those tasks that they've pulled in, right? I say, okay, prioritize these. What do you think is going to be the easiest to accomplish or the most important to accomplish? And let's get the product owner's take on this. All right. Start to prioritize that stuff. Start to order them according to how you would order them in the sprint. according to what you know and what you don't know. All right. And so that's another way I've tried to coach a team. What do you know you can do now? And what do you not know? What do you need more clarification on? Okay. So these are some of the ways that you can, as developers, kind of make things an ordered list of your own, right? Kind of set a priority on them. Kind of set, can we fit this in, right? That's another thing. Make sure it fits into, what you're capable of doing during the sprint, right? So these are some of the things that I've found effective.
That's good advice.
Mm-hmm.
This question from Ashok. When conveying the product vision to the Scrum team, should the product owner talk more about the value that the product is going to create to the end user, or the revenue that the product will bring to the organization?
Ooh, I really like that question. So when talking about a product goal, do you talk about the value you're going to bring to the customer, or the revenue that's the company is going to get? I really like that question. So, when we talk about creating an increment, it has to be valuable, useful, and usable, right? Well, how do you know? So that's part of why a product owner is there. So you can summarize a product owner, the purpose for a product owner, in 2 words, and that's value maximizer, right? So really, as a product owner, you really have to weigh those options. I don't have the answer to that. All I know is that in my experience, what's more valuable to a user overtakes revenue, because when you establish that relationship with your user, they're going to become more important, because they're going to be the cheerleaders for your product, and they're going to be the main people that are going to be driving revenue. That's my experience anyway. As a product owner, like I said, it's up to you. You're the one that is maximizing that value, right? So it could be either one. In my experience, though, it's customer value. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. This next question, can you speak more about how acceptance criteria should be used to ensure there is a common understanding?
Yes. So let's go back a little bit here. So when we're talking about acceptance criteria, oops, let's not do that yet. So here's an example of acceptance criteria. Given I am something and I do this and I do this, when this happens, then I expect this result. So the most important part of this whole given, when, then structure is the then part. The then part shows the purpose. Okay. Why are we doing what we're doing? Okay. This is the expected value. Okay. So I think this pretty much depicts it right here. Right. I think that was the question, right, Lindsay, if I remember?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So here's acceptance criteria. Again, this is all about the how. So this really doesn't talk about the what so much. The what is more of a user story. As a user, I want something so that. Okay. Even in that scenario, the user story, it's all about the business value. It's all about the what. So that is the most important part. Right. So I hope this answers your question. The most important part here is the purpose. Oh, good question.
Thanks. All right, we have time for 1 or 2 more here. This question comes from Guy. I'm clear on the value regarding the definition of done or definition of ready, sprints, and acceptance tests. But what are some of the definitions or language that you found are less obvious but as valuable?
What are some of the
definitions or language that you've found are less obvious but just as valuable? Are there other things?
So if I were to go back on to say what was less obvious or less valuable, I would go back.
Less obvious or but as
Oh,
valuable.
but as valuable, less obvious,
Yes.
but as valuable.
Yes.
So I would go back to this whole team size thing. I think that in my experience, this is probably one of the things that I struggle with the most in organizations, because people outside the organizations always want to throw more bodies at the problem, thinking that things are going to be faster. All right. This is not so obvious. Small team sizes are great. Okay. Just for those communication channels. Okay. That said, I do see a need to increase the team size. So what I say is that, like, I was on a Scrum team once, and I can't believe this was a Scrum team. It was actually 24, 23 or 24 members. I can't remember exactly the exact number, but it was huge. It was a technology team with no real focus. You could probably understand. Um, but what I started seeing as a Scrum Master is I started seeing patterns form, and this was a live setting too, in the team space. And I actually saw 3 distinct groups of people continually collaborating. And so we actually formed into 3 smaller teams at that point, because we saw 3 different products being developed here. So I'm a big fan of the small team size. That said, the bigger teams are needing to add people to a team. I get it. So one thing I found that's not as obvious when you have a common language is it's easier to onboard. Okay. Because you have things where you have a common language. Okay, we want to build a tire swing, and this is where we are so far. We have this language. Okay, this is how we talk about our when we talk about collaborating with as developers. This is how we have our branches, right? And so when you add someone, you want to establish 5 more communication channels, like I had in my example. It's much easier. And so it's not as obvious, but like I said, I'm a big fan of that small team. So hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks. So
Yes.
we are running short on time here, but I know we did not get to all these questions. There are a lot of open questions. Lots of great conversations still to be had. What I will do is I will share all of the open questions with John, and John will figure out a way to answer those for you.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation. This has been a great interactive session, and I feel like we've all gotten some really good value out of it. John, if you could just go to those closing slides, please.
I'm here at the
Oh, there we go.
Yep.
Okay. Just as a reminder, there are a bunch of free resources on the Scrum.org website, including digital learning paths. Please feel free to check those out to continue your learning. Lots of videos, blogs, and other things on there to help you out. So next slide, please. And as we close out, please stay connected with us through our forums, social media channels, our blog, and webinars like this one. We run a few of these a month, so feel free to check those out on our website in our resource section. And I would like to thank you, John, for an awesome session here. I think everyone is energized and excited for the new year, and this is a great issue to tackle at the beginning of the year, for sure.
Absolutely. I want to express my gratitude as well to everyone. This is what makes the session excellent, is all this interaction. So I appreciate it as well. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you all, and we will be in touch soon. Scrum on. Take care.